Hello again, and welcome to Chapter 3 of Episode 9 of Construction Rocks. Last time, we talked about how to mark hip rafters. This time, we're going to mark, yes, valley rafters. But fortunately, 3/4 of what I taught you last time applies to valley rafters too. So let's get to it, shall we? So before we begin, let's review what valley rafters look like. Valley rafters are needed when there are two perpendicular roofs intersecting each other. Notice how the valley and hip rafters are parallel, so its pitch is the same as the hip rafter, which is x/17. Now let's go into how to mark a valley rafter, since it's a little bit different than how you mark a hip rafter. So we need to mark our first plumb line. Fortunately, it's either a double or a single cheek cut based on how the ridges connect. So you can, look back on part 1 to see how those cuts are made. Now, if the valley and the hip rafter happen to be hitting the same ridge board, then you don't need to worry how long the valley rafter is, because it's exactly the same as the hip rafter, if that's the case. Now we need to mark the valley rafter's bird's mouth. Since the valley rafter rests on an inside corner of a wall, we need a special cut done on it. So here's the procedures of how to make the valley rafter's bird's mouth. It's gonna be fun. So first, measure your valley rafter's length, starting from this line at the end of the tip point of a double cheek cut. And since the hip and valley rafters are the same for my doghouse, it's gonna be 45 and 15/16 for the valley rafter, just like my hip rafter. So we go all the way down here, down there. And then we mark right here. So once you draw a square line, where the length of the rafter is going to be, then you flip it over. And just like the last chapter, you take your speed square and you pivot until that number 11 on the hip val column is on the edge of our board, and then we trace our plumb line. Now after you do that, go ahead and take your common rafter that you're going to use and find the bird's mouth. So for mine is right there. Now measure from the top edge of the board down to the perpendicular line of your bird's mouth. So for mine, it's 2 inches. Now measure down that same measurement down your plumb line of your valley rafter. So you take your ruler and then you mark where the 2-inch mark is. Right there. And once you made your mark right there on your plumb line, then go ahead and take your speed square, and remember that dotted line right there? Well, go ahead and line that up with your plumb line, and shoop, there you go. There's your perpendicular line. Now after you made that perpendicular line, go ahead and take your ruler and go 3/4 of an inch to the right. So I'll mark 3/4 to the right, right there. And then once again, we take our speed square, we pivot once again until then number 11 is flush with our edge of the board. And then we trace once more. And there we go, we have our second plumb line. Now once we do that, we flip it on the bottom side. We flip it on the bottom side. And then we square up where the first and second plumb lines are on this edge right here. So here's where the first plumb line is, and here is where the second one is. Next, like before on the last chapter, we take our speed square, we put our pen or pencil in the groove on the 3/4 mark, and then we go down, and there's the center line of this side of the board. Now, we go ahead and we connect the dots from here to there and there to here. So let me go ahead and do that for you. Here reconnect the dots. And there we go. Now we have a point under our bird's mouth. Now let me go ahead and cut it out for you. Well, it's not my best work, but as Red Green says, if the woman don't find you handsome,
they should at least find you handy.
Notice that it forms a 90-degree point right there so that it can fit inside that inside corner. Now the next thing that we need to do is to figure out our valley's tail. Now since the hip and valley are so similar, their tail lengths are exactly the same. And if you haven't, seen the part in which we calculate the hip and valley's tail length, just rewind it actually. Rewind it, earlier on, and I explain it to you. So measure from your first plumb line of your bird's mouth the length of your tail. Mine is 5.5 inches. So we go ahead and take our tape measure and mark the length of our tail. So mine is 5.5 right there. Now the process of making the valley's tail is exactly the same as making a double cheek cut of our first plumb cut. So let me review you on that. So the first thing that you do is you square up the mark that you just made. So there's my mark right there. Now from this square mark we flip it over like so, and once again we take old Mr. Speed Square. We pivot Mr. Speed Square until that number 11 is lined up with the edge of our board again. And then we just trace like that. Now, go ahead and take your ruler and measure out 3/4 from that line. So right there. And once again, we take Mr. Speed Square and we pivot yet again, that same 11. And then, shoom, there we go. We have our second plumb line. Now we bring it back up, and then we square where the second plumb line is. So we go ahead and square it up on top. And then, once again, we find that 3/4 mark right there. And then we just trace it down to get the center of our board yet again. Like so. And then we just connect the dots. So from this point to that side, and from this side, and there we go, we have our point. Whew. Not only have I kept my promise, but I've also made the longest episode yet. Just saying, I'm just saying that. Now I know I'm done. Now, when Mr. Swanson was making his Speed Square, he also knew that rafters were pretty hard to make. So he also made another set of scriptures that help those who are making roofs. Now, on my next episode, we will put these common rafters and hip rafters and valley rafters and ridge boards all together to make the roof of the doghouse. Yeah, let's go. And as you know, I'm John Kessler, and I'll see you later. The end.